Hello, I'm Simon Stevens. I'm curator of the ship model and boat collections here at the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich. The virtual reality experience that we have created focuses on the Bristol, which was a fourth-rate 50-gun ship and is centred around when it became a prison hulk. The Bristol Hello, I'm Simon Stevens. I'm curator of the ship model and boat collections here at the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich. The virtual reality experience that we have created focuses on the Bristol, which was a fourth-rate 50-gun ship and is centred around when it became a prison hulk. The Bristol was launched in 1775. One of its most notable actions was during the American War of Independence, when it became the flagship for Sir Peter Parker when he attacked Sullivan's Island in 1776. A wooden fighting warship, by its very nature, would deteriorate over a period of time, and as a result, the Bristol was decommissioned from the Navy in 1786. It spent a short period of time as a hospital ship, and then it ended its days moored in the Medway off of Gillingham. We were able to reconstruct this programme because there is some really good reference material around the ship model of the Bristol, which is currently in the collections at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto. As fitted plans, which are held at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, as well as a number of manuscripts and also plans of the ship when it was converted to a prison hulk. What we have here is one of a series of 6 dockyards that was commissioned by Earl of Sandwich, who was First Lord of the Admiralty. This particular model is of Sheerness. So the whole thinking behind these models is to show George III the process of designing, building and maintaining the sailing navy in these very complex dockyards. And these are explained with these models, and you can see the wood arriving by barge here. And then there are all these different processes that the timber goes through: drying, it's cut and sawn into certain size lengths. And behind here, we've also got a small building where the planks were heated up so they could be bent, so that when they're applied to the hull, because obviously the hull is curved in shape. Then as we go along the model here, there's more piles of timber for different parts of the ship, like the frames and the deck beams. There's a group here of retired warships, or hulks as we would call them. And these are ships that are no longer in service, which have been either run ashore and built round and used either for storage or accommodation. And then as we move around the model here, we eventually come to what is called the mast pond. And this is where the masts and spars were stored just below water level to keep them supple and from drying out, because obviously if a tree in the round dries out, it splits. Another interesting feature on this model is this little island here, which is what we call a ballast dump. So to actually make the ship sit properly in the water, to ballast it correctly, they would add shingle in bags or bars of pig iron to ballast or trim the ship in the correct position so that it would sail efficiently. We're currently in our ship model store at Chatham Dockyard in the collections research area. This is a navy board style, as we would call it, and it represents the ships of the mid-17th century onwards. And at that time, they were beautifully decorated with these carved figureheads, wreathed gun ports. But then as we move into the 18th century, it was clear that the cost of maintenance and production of those ships was coming prohibitive. So they then moved to ships in the 18th century, which done away with the carved decoration, wreathed ports and simplified figureheads. And then the models themselves take on a new style, what we call the Georgian style, where the hull below the waterline is fully planked as opposed to the open frames. You've got these lovely painted frieze works along the bulwarks here. And you also notice that they started using different materials. They had bone for the wheel and the rail at the break of the quarterdeck. And they use this lovely light wood, hardwood, like boxwood and holly, which are slow growing English hardwoods where there's very little grain. If you use something like oak or pine, the grain would stand out too much and you would lose any idea of scale. These models were made for a number of reasons, but predominantly at this time, they were probably made for presentation for high ranking civil servants, individuals associated with the Navy or a particular ship. these models would have been very time consuming and expensive to make and would have taken several years to build. We're very lucky with the Bristol model in that we were able to go inside with a medical endoscope and find a note signed from George Stockwell, the model maker, who worked in the Sheerness dockyard. And on that note was a date of 1774, and he was signed as the shipwright and being in charge of making the model. It's very rare to find notes or signatures from model makers in the 17th and 18th century because they weren't officially on the books of the Navy and the dockyard. We know quite a bit about George Stockwell. For instance, we know for a fact that he actually was involved in the construction of this model. We think that this model here, a full freight 50-gun warship, represents the Bristol as the model in the AGO. And we also know that he built this model here of the sloop Squirrel. We can only assume that he either had a workshop within the dockyard or nearby just outside the dockyard perimeter in Sheerness. George Stockwell.
Inside the Bristol, you will find this symbol floating in different zones. You can click the play button to hear about life aboard the ship. An acute shortage of prison accommodation in England became worse during the American Revolutionary War in the 1770s, as prisoners could no longer be transported to the American colonies to serve their sentences. Also, during the Napoleonic Wars between 1783 and 1815, approximately 200,000 French prisoners of war were captured. Warships no longer considered seaworthy were converted into storage or prison ships known as hulks. Dark, damp, and rat-infested places. In 1794, the warship Bristol was stripped of its equipment and rigging and modified to hold prisoners of war or POWs. As Bristol's final service to the British Admiralty, the ship was moored at Gillingham Reach near the Chatham dockyard on the River Medway until it was finally broken up in 1810 at Sheerness dockyard. POWs were up at 6 a.m. in summer and returned to their decks by 9 p.m. In winter, they were up at 8 a.m., then below decks by 8 p.m. Guards described the nauseating smell that came up from the prisoners' decks when they unlocked the hatches each morning. The stench of air polluted by poor sanitation, crowded conditions, and disease. Illness was common amongst the POWs, made worse by their inadequate diet, lack of exercise, contagious diseases, and little available medical attention. The upper deck, known as the park, but the forecastle of the hulk, were available for outdoor exercise. At only 40 feet by 38 feet, the upper deck was preferable to the forecastle, which was close to the chimneys belching out coal smoke.
You'd be wise to stay away from gambling. It's popular here because there's nothing else to do, but prisoners become obsessed with it and gamble away every last thing they have. I've seen prisoners end up gambling away their food rations, their bedding, and even their clothes.
Each hulk was commanded by a lieutenant with a master as second in command. 40 to 50 soldiers, seamen, and servants were also assigned to each hulk. Guards and prisoners both decided on justice and punishment for crimes such as theft, fighting, and escape attempts. Escape was difficult, but POWs still tried to flee in empty barrels, boats left unchained, or through holes excavated through the side of the hulk. POWs who failed to escape were returned to the hulk. If they could not pay for the cost of their capture, they were docked food rations, lashed, or placed in the black hole, a 6 by 6 foot space in the depths of the ship's hold, where food and latrine boxes were provided once a day, if at all.
Do you have any money with you? You can buy a better spot to hang your hammock if you do. The best spots are by the gunports, because then you have fresh air, relief from the nasty smell of inside. And you can be the first one to see who's coming from shore. Sometime traders come, and if you have something to trade, you can get food from shore.